Good evening, everybody. Hello. Welcome to our MAK Dialogues talk, which is also being recorded, so it can be watched from anywhere in the world. I'm very happy to welcome our two artists, Kerstin from Gabain and Pérard, this evening. Both contributed brand new works to the two-person exhibition Climate Pandemics, Dark Euphoria that we developed for Vienna Biennale 2021. This year's Vienna Biennale, just to introduce that shortly, had very important topics of climate care, tackling climate change, dealing with our new relationship to the planet, with a large-scale and didactic exhibition with the same title. With contributions from art design and architecture. But also, as every time with Vienna Biennale, we are supporting emerging artists who are living in Vienna with group shows and two-person shows. And this time, I have the pleasure to work with Kerstin and Ivan for that. And Vienna Biennale had an overall positive and inspirational kind of topic. But for this exhibition, we tried to look also at the little more dystopian side of things. And I was inspired for this, the premise for the exhibition by science fiction literature or climate fiction, meaning literature, novels that are dealing with the apocalypse or dystopian places, but not with zombies or in outer space, but caused by very realistic circumstances that are actually happening all over the world, like flooding or droughts or wildfires. And I was briefing the artists in a way, like looking at their work and what they're dealing with, and both are already inspired also by sci-fi, with how would that world look like in the future where everything went rogue? So I would invite both of them to explain a little which projects they did for the show. And I personally think it goes very, very well together. I had intended to show exhibition views, but maybe Ivan could take over this task on my behalf, because now I'm on my phone instead of my computer. And I would maybe first invite Kerstin to tell us a little bit about her practice, about the works in the exhibition.
So I, in the past years, have been working. So I cast a lot of objects and things, especially bones. And for the show in the MAK, I show some different casts of bones, specifically a hippo jawbone, different materials like wax and so, in combination with different type of models of objects, architectural models. You don't really know exactly what it is, right? And play a bit with scale. I think I tried to approach the topic through creating a specific mood, right? Thank you. That helps a lot.
Perfect.
I guess that was what you wanted me to do, Marlies, right?
Yes, thank you, because now I'm disabled.
Yeah, I wouldn't say so much more. It's just, also, I mean, I like the idea of creating maybe an atmosphere from some type of natural history museum, which I think has a sci-fi thing to it. Yeah, okay, that's it.
Yeah, I think as you say, a future archaeology, or this idea, what can bones actually tell us about the past if we find them, so they can even be used to source ancient DNA and give us information about long extinct species. And in this case of our show and the premise around it, maybe about us humans after we didn't achieve to meet the climate goals. So Ivan, you are working very differently. You're using 3D printing a lot and are inspired by technology and the use of it. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your characters in the show?
So I think that, like, as you put it out on the table in front of us, the premise of what the fiction could be for the show was quite clear for the start, and then I start to get to know Kerstin and Kerstin's work, and I think we both had in a funny kind of way that it wasn't the most obvious combination from the start with this theme in mind, but it kind of works out very nicely in that, like, Kerstin's play with scale and materiality, they transform over to my objects in a certain sort of way that leaves both of them coming out of this conversation with more than what they entered the conversation with, maybe. But then the whole show kind of shaped itself organically along the production process. So I think, yeah, with this context you came up with, that for me it was very obvious that the sculptures were maybe caretakers, maybe flying around kind of creatures, taking care of these remnants that were left behind 1,000 years in the future, 2,000 years in the future, on the other side of some extinction event. And then what would a picture of that be, basically? That's kind of where I started my process, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think that it's very interesting, as you mentioned, the kind of the scale of things. So recently, Kerstin also started in her practice to use like model making. We saw an example before, and also in her solo exhibition at her gallery Exile just recently, there was more to be seen in this regard. For example, shelter for beasts, bird houses that are specifically created. And what interests you in these models, or what's the new process that you're following here, Kerstin?
I like playing with scale, or you know, I often start out working with a model and then I might do it in big, but it doesn't have to be like that. Sometimes the actual model is the actual artwork. But I mean, in this specific situation now at the MAK, at the show, the idea behind the models were also like, I was looking into like prototype utopian societies, like the Shaker religion in the US, very futuristic. You know, they had a very simple lifestyle, or like a very like ideological lifestyle, and I always thought a future society where everything went down the drain and there are no resources left, we probably have to live in these like kind of utopian simple societies which are very like reduced to very simple small things. So maybe that was a bit the idea behind the models for the show here. What I also think is interesting in the models are like often in sci-fi movies, you know, most of these scenarios are actually 3D models, or actually small models of the future that could be. So it's also like hinting to that. And I also like the idea of playing with scale, where you don't know what's real or not real, or like if like it's kind of reality a bit or something.
Yeah,
you know, there's a certain humor to it.
Absolutely. And also, as you say, that it reminded me also of props in sci-fi movies, like in the early days, you know, when there were no 3D models, people would actually build these things to have, you know, to film them. And a question maybe for Ivan: how do you start like drafting your sculptures that I sometimes refer to as characters, because they seem to be like individuals rather than objects and non-human actors? Do you draw them, or do you just come up with them in the process of making the sculptures? How can we imagine that?
I think for this one, because the work process was still rather new to me at the time, so instead of leading towards like one picture that I wanted to produce, I wanted to go in many directions. Then we have these like example of the, what's it called, the Kollektivroman kind of, lots of different ideas or characters in a certain setting. In that way, like the production of it is rather like a two-step thing of having a fairly simple three-dimensional mesh behind the sculpture. So that part is a little bit more of a configurational problem, like a Brancusi sculpture or something like that, of what does a loop look like with a shoof and a shoof on the side? Then that starts that kind of fairly immediate response process with working with the computer and with coming to some result and then seeing, oh, do I like this? Where does this take me from here? Then later, of course, it turns into a quite normal physical sculptural practice of coloring and gluing all of these prints together and all of that stuff. So the work in the computer is an extension of the physical work in a certain sort of way. I think like that definitely it's leading towards a certain sort of diversity. Well, like with this one on the sculpture on the right, is a very leggy movement of sorts. Then it turns into a bird head as well. And I enjoy these little games that a sculpture can take in that associative space. Then on top of that goes a whole different process of mapping a surface onto it that has different connotations and different extrudes the surface in a certain sort of way. That is then an added layer of ornament that I think always was speaking very well with what you were up to, Kerstin, in your enlarging, delarging translations of materiality in pieces.
Yeah, and I also think what connects, for me at least, both of your works is that they have kind of an inherent narrative, even though they are also a conceptual piece, but they always have, you look at these objects or sculptures or constellations of sculptures in different settings, and there is immediately some kind of narrative coming to mind, which I like a lot. And you ask yourself, yeah, where are those coming from? What do they tell me? And I think what's very interesting is also that you have very specific titles, the both of you, for your works that are not necessarily naming only the object what it is, but they refer to more. So I don't know who of you wants to start about that, but I think titles are such a crucial part of your work, and maybe we can see some of the images and also let the audience know what the title of the work is so they can get this idea a little bit. Kerstin, do you want to start?
Titles are very important. I think for this exhibition, I kind of chose to use very descriptive titles that they just describe what is displayed. But but it's kind of enough. So in this case, which right now that's jaw hippo bone number 2 or something, and then also the material. And obviously the models, it's an oven or it's a dissecting table, the model of the dissecting table of which the objects are standing on top. Or in this case, it's the showcase, which you can see in big as well in the show, right? So I don't always have descriptive titles, but I think in this kind of environment, it was important for me also to reference of natural history museums.
Exactly, yeah, to describe the findings.
Yeah, to just describe the findings. which are displayed. So
yeah.
I think, yeah, but that's like specifically for the show, for this show, right?
Yeah. And what I meant, like in other shows or also your solo exhibitions, and one of my favorite titles is Shelter for Beasts, is something where you get your mind going, like what's going on there? What are they sheltered from? Which beasts is she referring to?
Yeah, I think it's a reference to Anthony Fiedler, who's like this theoretician or writer
Yeah.
who wrote about architecture. But shelter, it's a place which comforts you, or safe haven, or like safe place. And beasts, I guess monsters also need a place to hide. Or they often come from very dark places, I assume.
Yeah.
So
From within or the outside. So I yeah, really like that reference a lot. And so Ivan, I think for this show specifically, some of the titles are really also referring to climate change. Are they?
It's not unfriendly with that, at least. It leans towards that. But I think the direction of titles in the past couple of years that I've generally been going for is there's this culture series written by Ian Banks, and in that these vast spaceships are naming themselves at times rather ridiculous things. So like the sculpture that just was before is called Earth First, and I like that it has a certain ambiguous character in that. What does putting Earth first mean? From the show Expanse, and it's a rather right wing as opposed to Mars first, then it's Earth first. In that way, I think they can have their own logic for what they want to be called, and it's part of their expression of the brain that they are. The gray matter that composes these sculptures have chosen to combine themselves into this form, and from this form they want to be called that.
Makes sense. Okay. Can you still hear me actually?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Because now my technology is failing me today. It's really suiting for this show. So bad. I'm so sorry. Yeah, I just read the first Q&A question actually from Kayla. Thank you so much for that. And I think we can mix that in because it fits actually the topic that we just had right now, Earth First. He says, I like the exhibition so far. I like the exhibition, but so far I noticed that it treats climate change as something that happens to other species while humans will remain untouched observers. Was that intentional, or did I miss some of the narrative? So I think maybe you mean the overall Vienna Biennale or the large exhibition, where I would personally claim that that is not even true, because we try to establish a modern human perspective and stress all the time the interdependence of all species together, and how we are actually reliant on fungi, on pollinators, on insects, on trees who produce oxygen for us humans to make a collective effort. But the responsibility lies with the humans to do something. And specifically in the show Dark Euphoria, as the title maybe tells, it's the dystopian part. And here actually the claim is, and there's this little short story that accompanies the show also, that humans have been extinct. So that's why we are actually finding those little relics, and the non-human scientist who is the narrator of the story actually tries to recreate the lifestyle that the humans were leading in our age when we were still here on Earth, and try to reconstruct how it could happen that we knew about all these things going on and still chose not to do anything against it, or just failed with it, because you can't always do that. So maybe that explains it a bit. If there is more questions, keep them coming. All right, I just checked. No. Yeah, I maybe because you said, Ivan, before, the gray matter that the sculptures are composed of, which is quite literal the material you are working with in your studio, but also you reference in your descriptions when I asked about your work, the gray goose scenario. Do you want to explain maybe a little bit what that means?
So I don't know if everybody's familiar with that
Exactly.
scenario in general. It's a extinction event scenario where we would by accident kind of construct self-replicating. It could be bulldozers or nanobots, but it would run out of hand and become you make a cleaning robot, and then eventually you make a self-replicating cleaning robot, so the cleaning robot can make more cleaning robots, and then you end up by accident cleaning the whole planet. It's one of those ones that might happen if we're not completely careful with our programming at some point, because sure, could be done. Then, like, at the same time, I think it's an opportunity for a sculpture to take on any shape, to imagine that this was done on a nanoscale. And it's something that I started working with kind of a year beforehand in an exhibition with Yang Li at Loggia, where smaller works at that time were based to be for microbial life. So this idea of a city full of skyscrapers, well, that city full of skyscrapers could be 1 centimeter high. So maybe that feeds back into the narrative of scale with Kerstin that we've also been talking about. This, I think, can be many things in that. And Grey Goose seems like a good opportunity to let your imagination go a little bit with what shape would that take. And as the question is posing that humans are devoid there, then the surfaces of these sculptures are actually filled with what I would call very human elements in them. You have print boards, you have tiny cities, you have a couple of pyramids here and there. And then on top of that, you have a paint job that's leading towards marking as a tribal kind of marking, as a makeup, something along those lines that seems to be a residual idea left in the computer, left in the programming long after we were gone. So that's the element that is clearly referencing a human presence of sorts.
Absolutely. And I remember when you told me the sculptures will be painted and they will wear makeup, basically. So I like this reference to the tribes as well. And I think that connects again back to this idea of bones having some also ritualistic meaning, or being able to be used as a bone oracle or as a talisman that you wear around your neck. And also bones being the last thing that will remain of any species that has bones, that will be preserved hundreds and thousands and millions of years and enable us to learn about things like forensics of the past. And yeah, maybe again a little bit to inspiration sources. So I already admitted I'm a huge fan of science fiction literature and climate fiction, and also movies, obviously. Kerstin, you are also into anime and the aesthetics of it and the topics there. What do you like about these Japanese cultural films and comic books?
I like the colors. I like, I think basically I think they have like a different approach. I mean, I think they often have, it's often very futuristic. You could say, I mean, I like this, I like that it's not, I mean, it's drawn, it has this other, how do you say, in German you say Ebene, it's not realistic. it's drawn. It's not, the characters are not real. They're not real humans acting out something. So, and also mostly the stories attract me. Yeah, don't know what to say.
Yeah, also a little bit dystopian sometimes, I think, right? And raw. All right, so another question that I wanted to ask you guys, in reference to this idea of another relationship towards the planet and everything we discussed in Vienna Biennale, and I know that both of you have seen some of the other exhibition parts or topics as well. What's your take? And tomorrow is, for example, the next global climate strike that many of us here at MAK will also take part in. What are the measures that we should be taking? Is demonstrating and calling out activism enough, or what else can be done, and what can be done from the side of artists, for example? It's a tough question, I know.
Do you want to go first, Kerstin?
No, you go first.
Ivan, start.
Well, first of all, I think it's a good question to try to tackle, and it's a very it's a tough theme to tackle without becoming educational. And I think a lot of what the MAK was doing, and also the breadth, the wideness of what points of view you bring into this, is that they deserve a thorough treatment, and that treatment is not necessarily stamping hardcore down on giving one answer that is then easily said as, oh no, let's all not use straws, drinking straws, and then everything will be great from there. So I think that in that way, science fiction is such a potent way of dealing with it, that you get to relate to story, you get to relate to storyline, where you can see you and your challenges mirrored. That's also where I don't feel that the question of climate change is underrepresented in movies. Hollywood movies nowadays are all about a planet exploding and a volcano erupting, a flood. So in that way, that it's tricky for me to say what should we do more or what should we do now. But I think being in a fictional headspace where you think about what could go wrong is a good headspace to be in, to make sure that it doesn't go wrong. Something along those lines.
Yeah, that's exactly also why I chose that topic, maybe to put that, like this idea of imagine what could go wrong, and you don't want to live that way, or maybe we do, but maybe we don't want to be extinct just yet. And this touches you more emotionally, and you can like feel how that would be like. And maybe that tackles more of an activism inside people than reading 7 very specific articles about carbon drawdown, which is also important, but I'm not a scientist. We had to read some of those in research for the exhibitions, but it's a difficult topic to understand all these interrelations of things. And on a very basic level, it's always about how can we try and live, not necessarily the same way we do now, because there will be scarcity or there will be nature catastrophes, increasingly so. It's a valid point. And also maybe one last thing on the sci-fi topic. I also think that in science fiction, literature and films, things have been imagined that later have become reality. So I think that's also a point that connects sci-fi literature so much with art for me, with fine arts, because you can dream up scenarios and things that then might come into existence, because there's always a little bit science in it. What do you think, Kerstin?
I think there's a big difference between talking about all these topics and implementing change in our everyday lives. I don't feel artists should have a specific role in this discussion. It's something we all have to tackle, society as a whole. I don't think artists have an educational purpose, or it shouldn't, you know, you don't make art to educate.
No, but to inspire, maybe. Yeah. Maybe
to inspire, right? It's difficult to say because a lot of things, you know, I mean, you know, I use a lot of materials which are not very environmental friendly, for example. It's, you know, these questions are, it's like everyday life questions, like not to go buying food without buying plastic or something. It starts, I think it's more a question of how to change in your everyday life. Like, I don't know, if you have a car, should you not have a car? Is it okay? Is it okay to fly for exhibition, right? I don't know how to, like, for me, it's hard to say if it's like something I should want to discuss in my artworks.
Okay.
More about how to say organization of how we organize society.
Yeah. Yeah, when thinking about the exhibition title and premise, and the full title is Climate Pandemics, Dark Euphoria, like the first part of some auto shooter game, I don't know. The pandemics was an important cue for me, because we all experienced, obviously, the lockdowns, and during the lockdowns, it was when we started to conceptualize and curate all the exhibition projects for Vienna Biennale in endless Zoom calls and from the home office. And I read a bunch of articles and watched a bunch of talks about the relation between increasing pandemics that emerge from the soul sphere, like from animal kingdom into human society, and the mutations of viruses that are also happening because of temperature rises or different climate related issues. So it is all very much tied together. And I thought also the idea of recurring pandemics that I referred to in this little text for the exhibition is something that is not sci-fi at all, but basically very much likely to happen. How did you experience your work for projects during this pandemic that we all still live in? And was it any different? Did you have a different eye on your own work, or yeah, tell us about it.
You want to start even, or I mean, in my case, I mean, I did have a lot more time, like most people. So obviously it influenced my work. I do think it will influence production of things. I just don't think, I'm not so sure it would happen. So take time, you know, like, you know, there's a lot of things which happened the past 2 years, or like how we communicate with each other, or like we found out there are a lot of things we might not need. I don't know, or for myself. I'm not so sure. It's like I will immediately, like, you will immediately tell. It probably will take some time to see the influence or the impact, right? That's what I can say, speaking for myself. I mean, I kind of liked it at times. That, you know,
absolutely romanticizing the first lockdown. What's your take, Ivan?
I don't know. it's a huge change in a lot of ways when it started, but it's also like, I think, first lockdown, I bought my first 3D printer and then started doodling around with that. And then I think I just lost myself and didn't really think about anything else than just like home and couple life and doing this and figuring all of that stuff out. I don't know that I would have had the time and the focus to change my practice in that way without a lockdown. I think that there would have been other responsibilities and socially interesting things that would have dragged my attention away. So in that way, it's a complete present for a working person to be giving all of that time to yourself. At the same time, it feels weird by now. Our opening felt weird at the time, that it was just like so small and you feel you've worked so long and then you're showing it to 20 people. In that way, I would say it felt dystopian for me also in the basement at MAK at the opening, in a weird, reflective, maybe positive way. Then definitely miss it. The good old social days, definitely want to go back, but it's a slow process, I think, to be really back at that.
Yeah, it is absolutely, and you're so right. Our opening back in May felt super dystopian because we still only were allowed to let a limited number of people enter the museum, even though wearing masks. Now we are without that limit, and I can assure you, a lot of people have now seen your show in the meantime, which we are very happy about. But you're right, the opening felt kind of off. It was super distancing, 2 meters, and things that we are no longer doing now because many are vaccinated and we have proper ways of testing. But still, yeah, that was kind of for this show adding to the experience actually of visiting the show. And maybe one other thing, there's this one of my favorite kind of climate fiction novels. It's called Oryx and Craig by Margaret Atwood, the queen of sci-fi herself. And there's this kind of global pandemic wiping out most of humankind, and there's this sole survivor called Snowman. And there are all these new creatures who don't know anything about the world, the before, as they call it, where there was this weird kind of species that did a bunch of weird stuff. And they always find some relics at the beach, like a toaster or something. And then they ask the snowman, like, what's that thing? And say, oh, it's a toaster. What's a toaster? It's an electric machine that was built to make soft bread, hard and crispy. And if you look at it that way, it's very confusing, because why would you do that? And at some point, these creatures, they also don't know aggression and hate and things like that. But at some point, they turn and evolve, and then they start making art. And Snowman notices, because he's a human and he knows it from the before, and gets worried because that's kind of there's something happening there. So what's your take on that little anecdote? Like, is a culture, a post-apocalyptic culture, will there still be art being made after a certain point of, we ensured our survival, we are having our last coffee beans that we saved, living in our little shelters? Are we making art?
I mean, I'm thinking that, like, maybe art is one of the few things you can't replace by computers or even AI.
True.
Let's see, because, like, there's or robots. I mean, there's so many things things humans can do, which robots can probably do better. And I have like this romantic idea that maybe art is something robots can't do. Nothing against robots, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not doing this.
No, absolutely embrace the non-human actors here. No worries, no discrimination is being done here. But I couldn't agree more, Kerstin, because even if a robot can make an artwork, and it has been done, AI has composed music and drawn pictures, but the question is, what's the fun of it? I mean, maybe we have to do it because we get something out of it, right? We are called out for robophobia. Sorry, Caleb. We didn't mean it. We love robots.
We don't have true AI yet, and we're still just on the brink of, like, actually one of the sculptures in the show is called Anthropomorphic Projection, and that was this, like, a word from this great series of lectures at the Brandhaus Museum, all about these questions of where is technology influencing the art world in the future in a certain sort of way. And just because we're seeing the MIT robot walk around in a human-like way doesn't mean that it knows that it's doing that. It means that we programmed it to do something that is endearing for us, that we feel attracted to. So when you see all of these crypto crunchy kind of algorithms doing machine learning on flipping 1,000 dog heads into a picture of a sunflower, then you're seeing a bunch of men, women programming as something that does this. That's very different from what a true AI would do. It's just not there yet.
Yeah, and again, I think it's about like what makes sense to us. So even a robot orchestra can play music, absolutely, but the musicians, the human musicians, want to play the music or make the art. You know, that's like, we can't automate it all.
Yeah, but I'm not so sure if it's always about when you hear music or someone plays a piece of music or orchestra or you make a piece of art, if it's about perfection.
No, it's not.
Yeah, and you know, like, it's not logic. So I don't know, obviously one day you will probably be able to program emotions, right? But
maybe the mimicking of emotions.
It will still follow some sort of. Yes, please.
Oh, just because you're sitting in front of this wonderful piece of art, Don't Work, Cry. I did an exhibition titled Artificial Tears for Vienna Biennale back in 2017, and it was all about this kind of automation. What can we automate? And obviously we can also automate crying, or like tears at least. So if you have dry eyes, you can use artificial tears. But what I learned from research back then was when we cry is a physical action, and the tears that you cry as a human contain opioids that calm you down. They contain a bunch of chemicals, and also the physical act of crying is work, labor. It exhausts you. We see it in babies, in children. At some point, crying stops. It's exhausting. And that also is a process that was designed within the human and many animals as well, where we don't notice it so much, to help us cope with things. So you can't automate emotions in that sense. And the crying is just one example for it. Okay, are there more remarks from your side on the topic of dystopian living or living after abundance in a destroyed planet? Or are there any questions from the audience towards the artists, their works, or our wacko topics? Not seeing any at this point.
Let them have a moment.
Yeah, of course. I was just looking if I press the right buttons. Okay. In any case, I just hear there's no more questions. Our wonderful exhibition and also all the other shows at MAK and all the other Vienna Biennale locations that have exhibitions on, for example, University of Applied Arts, are open till 3rd of October. It's unbelievable to me that it's ending already. We just started. Please come by if you haven't been here yet. Take a look, because all the objects that we now shared quickly on some photos in this Zoom call are so much better and lively in real, because the material plays a lot of a role here, and also the interplay in the space when you move through the space. I would highly recommend that. I extend my sincere thanks to Ivan and Kerstin for contributing to this wonderful exhibition and this talk, and wish you a pleasant evening, my dears. Talk soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice evening.
Sorry for the technical breakdowns. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.